Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Catherine Mattice here, founder and CEO of Civility Partners. And I have a very special guest today. Respect Outside is the company that she's founded. And of course, we talk about a lot of the same types of things, but from a little bit different perspective. So Gina McClard has 25 years of experience working as a lawyer, advocating and litigating for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence, including sexual assault and sexual harassment. So this is amazing. And she co-founded the first crime victims litigation clinic and the nation's first Center for Law and Public Policy on Sexual Violence. She's a high achiever. And you're an activist for gender equity, and you love the outdoors, and you and your partner have started this amazing business, Respect Outside. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Tell us first a little bit about what Respect Outside does.
So we provide gender equity and violence prevention trainings in the outdoor industry. But it's a little bit broader than that. We're working on providing culture change within the outdoor industry with a lens on gender equity. And what we know is that, and I'm sure you know this too, Catherine, that, when you have one problem, or you have racism, if you have sexism, you really can't fully work on eradicating all those problems without taking a look at all the isms at one time. And the beauty about our approach, and I think really the beauty about civility and approaching a workplace with civility, is that you can start to take an intersectional approach and work on all these different egregious behaviors in the workplace, but from this point of how can we civilly have discourse about our problems and things we want to improve. How do you do that? So Respect Outside utilizes my expertise in the law and sexual harassment prevention and gender equity, but also my partner, Jim Miller, is a 30-year veteran in the outdoor industry. So he's been at every level of the outdoor industry. He started as a raft guide. Actually, he'll tell you he started fitting ski boots, in California back when he was 16, right? And so we kind of married literally and our expertise on working specifically within the niche of the outdoor industry, because there's a few factors that make the outdoor industry unique. I've been doing this work in other industries and with other folks for a long time, but it's really gratifying to be able to help those individuals that are working in the outdoor industry that have a kind of a unique perspective on life. So
yeah, okay. And I would imagine gender equity is that, because being outdoorsy and all of that stuff is kind of more seen as more masculine, and that would, so there, I would imagine there is some equity issues happening there.
There are plenty of equity issues going on.
I guess everywhere.
Everywhere, right? I mean, that's the thing that the outdoor industry is not unique in, but it's also the history of the outdoor industry and the pioneers and the folks who have laid the path all these times. 99% have been white males. And so, there is a legacy of other folks not having a place or having the access or having the leisure time to be able to pursue outdoor pursuits. But now that's shifting, and we see this after COVID too. A lot more folks are trying to get out into the outdoors for some solace, and people changing where they're working and taking a really hard look at their values and saying, how do I want to spend my time? What do I want to do? And so a lot of people are like, I love being outside. I love the environment. I love climbing. I love skiing or biking. And so why don't I spend my time around other folks who love that too? So that's we're really driven with passion-led individuals in the outdoor industry. And that's great. And it's really refreshing, because I love working with a lot of our different clients are just these amazing people with these amazing talents. And so it's really lovely.
Yeah. And yet another thing, COVID's changed, right? Probably more people are outside than before COVID. The new normal. What are some of the increased risk factors for discriminatory harassment in the outdoor spaces? And before you answer that, just to talk about that phrase, risk factors, maybe start there, because I'm not sure everyone knows what that phrase means.
Sure. So you are more likely to see sexual harassment or sexual gender discrimination in your workplace if you have these certain elements present. And the outdoor industry has lots of these. Now, these are also present, and as I go and talk about them, you'll be like, yeah, well, I see that in the hospitality industry for sure. But there are some that are really unique to the outdoor industry. So a homogeneous workplace, right?
Mhm.
That's a risk where you're going to see an increase in sexual harassment. And of course, like we've talked about, traditionally, people who are out there pursuing or actually getting into the business in the outdoor industry are men, are white males. And so, you're talking about other folks entering that arena where everybody's white and male. So that can be a risk factor that will increase your likelihood of seeing sexual harassment.
Right.
Another one is workplaces that have mostly young workers. And of course, with the outdoor industry, it really attracts young people. So young
Mhm.
people are coming in, especially let's take, for instance, the outfitter part of the outdoor industry, folks who are raft guides or ski instructors or people who are taking you out on hikes or climbing. These tend to be young people who are coming into the industry. This might be their first professional real job. And
Mhm.
so when you're dealing with young people who don't really know how to comport themselves in a professional workplace, and I say professional because that's a whole thing, is the outdoor industry, are we professional or are we the maverick renegades, right?
No, you got to be
Um,
professional according to the industry, right? It might
right,
be
right.
different than the or the white collar suit and tie, but
Sure.
there's still some version of professionalism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. But a lot of people see themselves as really kind of divorced from the corporate 9 to 5 when they work in the outdoor industry because they might have a job that has them living in the woods for weeks on end. But
Right.
they also might have a job where they're doing almost the exact same thing as anybody in any other industry, like say, for instance, retail. You're working at a bike shop, you work at REI, but you see yourself with values that have drawn you to this particular place because of your passions.
Mm.
So we do have this tension about, working in the outdoor industry because you're on the edge. You want to have a more balanced life that takes you outside, that allows you to engage in what feeds your soul. So a lot of
Mhm.
people think of themselves as big outdoor mavericks, in the outdoor industry and take pride in being separated from that 9 to 5. I don't work in a bank, right? And so I think that also plays into this kind of mentality that we're a little bit different. We don't need to abide by all these corporate rules because we're more laid back here in the outdoor industry, and that in itself can be a risk factor, right?
Right, right.
Another risk factor would be folks that work in isolated workplaces, and so we work with a lot of outdoor educators. So folks that go and take kids out into the woods and teach them how to climb, teach them the ethos of the environment, but they're out in isolated places with a coworker or two for weeks on end. And so
Mhm.
an isolated workplace really increases the ability of someone to engage in unwanted, unwelcome behaviors, but nobody's going to call you out on it because there's
Right,
nobody there,
right.
right? Cultures that engage, allow, encourage alcohol use.
Mhm.
That is a risk factor for increased likelihood to see sexual harassment, sexual discrimination in the workplace. And, the outdoor industry is very much like many of these organizations. You're having events where you're consuming alcohol with your clients or your customers. And
Right.
so it's naturally part of the long-standing recreational aspect of work. And so the outdoor industry has that as an increased work factor. Um, uh, another at risk factor, risk factor would be if there is a superstar employee or a high value employee that brings either prestige and kind of value to your organization because he's the class 5 raft guide, right? He
Right.
is the guy that, or she is the one that has gotten a lot of recognition and awards in climbing. And so this is this individual that brings you a lot. Could be a sales representative that also is the one that says sales uh, is your highest performing sales representative.
Yeah.
These kind of folks that you just don't want to call out for unwanted behavior because They bring so much value to your organization.
Yeah.
And, another risk factor, which is very apropos for today, is if you see in society, outside of your workplace, if you see kind of coarsened social discord or contention out in regular life, you see it on TV, you're taking a plane, somebody won't wear a mask, all of these kind of things somehow seep into our society so that people are feeling a little bit more comfortable being uncivil, being
Disruptive.
discriminatory. Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's another one that is present, because I don't think any of us can avoid being influenced in a little bit, one way or the other, by what's happening in society today. And as a civility advocate, it's really hard. It's really hard to see. But so that's what I would say, is that the outdoor industry ticks off a lot of these boxes of risk factors. And so there's a lot of change to be had, and there's a lot of folks in the outdoor industry who are very committed and interested in changing that, moving forward.
Yeah,
so that's great.
That's amazing. I feel like you were reading my slide in my harassment prevention training. I have a whole slide on risk factors, and I always find it interesting that a lot of the harassment prevention trainings out there don't touch on risk factors, or maybe they'll share a couple of them but not necessarily address them. And so we're definitely like-minded there, where a part of my training is like, well, do you see risk factors in this list that resonate with you and your organization? And if we're actually going to prevent harassment, then we got to prevent the risk factors that can facilitate harassment. So I feel like that's the kind of stuff we should be talking about, not necessarily the technical definition of harassment. Because if you feel harassed, you're not like, let me think back to that training. Is this the tech, Yeah.
Pull out my card that has a definition. No.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So, this really helps kind of a light bulb moment when we're talking with folks in the outdoor industry to explain why this kind of work is really needed. And so I think it resonates a lot. And in the trainings that Jim and I do, we do kind of function a little bit, and I'm using this more as an exaggerated point, but we kind of do operate good cop Jim, bad cop me.
Okay.
And because I'm the lawyer and I'm bringing a lot of this concern from outside the outdoor industry, and I'm saying, okay, now like having a regular happy hour that the company pays for all the drinks and there's no drink limit is a real problem. But Jim is steeped in this long-standing culture. He knows what folks in this industry, one of the things they feel wonderful about is that they socialize with their coworkers, socializing with alcohol. And so we balance our trainings, and we've really come to a place where we can say, this is the best thing you could do. And then these are some of more practical applications that you can take from what Gina's saying to apply to your business. So we do that.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to be able to take a look at approaching sexual harassment prevention, gender equity, and civility at a base level in a company. So taking a look at your policies and procedure, and building in how you want your employees to show up. What behaviors do you want to see? Instead of always focusing on what's not permitted, really taking a look at, from those fundamental corporate documents, how are we going to build the culture we want to see? Because as you know, your culture is happening, whether you do anything about it or not. So you can steer it on a positive course, or you can just let it go and see what you end up with. And that's really scary. And in this day and age, we all know it's the liability, and you might find that you put yourself out of business because you really didn't try and steer the course of your culture. So.
Yeah. And as culture consultants, we know you got to lean on core values. You've got to focus on exactly what you want. We do a lot of trainings for managers on how to create a positive work environment instead of like, here's the manager version of harassment prevention and what you should do in that scenario. Let's proactively every single day do things focused on the right culture, not wait for something bad to happen and then try to address it. We've got a lot of great
Right.
comments here, so I want to share some of them. A couple of people are talking about family. One person says, in my opinion, people need to learn first in their home. Another person says, it's the same person. Sorry. Jader also says family plays a key role in this transformation. So I totally agree. And I'm sure you do too, Gina. I'm sure there's outdoor families where they're outdoors together. Is there a way for you to tap into, equity and teaching people civility and respect kind of as a family, as they're venturing into the outdoor world?
Well, a lot of the training that we do, as you know, and I know you're a proponent of this as well, we utilize bystander intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that bystander intervention, this concept, for those of you that don't know, bystander intervention is when you see something that is unwelcome, unfair, discriminatory, of a bullying nature in your workplace. You are empowered by your organization and by management to be able to step in and stop it and say something.
Mm-hmm.
And we like to also flip that on its side and say, also, if you see something that your coworker's doing that's good, that is the behavior you want to see, that is a behavior you want to foster, call that out, highlight that, And so we do it for both things. We encourage employees to be able to say when they see something good and when they see something bad. But we also train on how this can help you in the real world, how this comes and shows up, and how you could exhibit those behaviors and practice those behaviors when you're in the grocery store line, when you're in a line on a plane, waiting to get on a plane, or with your kids, at a school PTA meeting. And so I think what's so important about marrying this concept of calling people out when they're acting inappropriately or when they're acting great, and you want to encourage that. But if you just suggest that this is the answer to how you're going to get at unwelcome behavior in your workplace, you're missing something. Mm-hmm. And that is, we explain what bystander intervention is, and we model it and we practice it. We do a lot of role playing because it's a weird thing. You got to learn how to do it. Yeah. But the biggest component is if we teach civility side by side with these new workplace behaviors, because you have to have a basis on how you approach your coworkers. What language do you use? People think
have the rapport you have to have the rapport that civility provides. If you can't go around being rude and calling someone out, right? You have to be civil if you're going to be a bystander.
So as a business, if you just promote calling out your coworkers on their unwanted behavior, you're walking down a really scary road, especially in this day and age when we're politically divided and there's so much contention, and you're seeing people who are just flaming each other, right? We use that floor of civility as saying, this is how you show up at work. This is how you deal with your coworkers. Civility is not just about, thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. Of course, that's part of it. That's important, right?
Yeah.
But it's really more about how are you keeping your coworkers' needs and desires in mind as you walk through your day. And if everybody was working at like us as an us, and me being concerned about you being concerned about me, it just makes for such a better place to show up and go to work and be your full self.
Right. And that's the other thing. All of this is tied to DEI initiatives. And I think, or I know a lot of HR professionals out there and employers, it's like everything's really siloed. We're going to have employee engagement. We're going to measure that. And then we're going to have a work-life balance initiative, and we'll measure that. And we're going to have DEI initiatives, and they sort of run siloed, but really it's a civility whole person initiative. And those are all pillars that funnel up to one larger picture. And so like, you can't talk about work-life balance if you're not talking about flexible work, and you can't talk about DEI if you're not talking about flexible work. You can't talk about employee engagement if you're not talking about psychological safety, which also goes along with those others. So they're all together.
They're all intertwined. It's a big old web.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. I love, always joke, I need to start getting people on here who totally disagree with me, because I always end up talking to people like you. I'm like, yes, I agree. Amen. So talk to me about how, we're both talking about civility. Are there civility trainings that you do too, or how do you integrate all of these things into your work?
So we talk about, as civility training, because like I said, if I'm going to train on bystander intervention, I've got to explain the framework and the expected behavior of how we deal with each other on any kind of issue. And then you throw in something rather contentious. And for folks who don't have a lot of information about bystander intervention, there's a lot of different ways. So a lot of people think bystander intervention is directly confronting someone. And that may be the case, but there's a lot of other ways that you might be able to help your coworker when something inappropriate is happening. Maybe you wait until the individual who was making the comments leaves, and you pull your coworker aside and just give them some support. And that's huge, because it really helps, especially when we have folks who are from marginalized communities, or folks who are like perhaps the only woman in the workplace who's routinely getting these kind of behaviors, is the brunt of these kind of behaviors. Having somebody pull you aside, recognize what happened, and then say, "Are you okay?" That is great. That's huge, right? And you might have somebody, observe an interaction and then go to management and say, "I just saw that this happened and I don't think it's right. And so I want to bring it to your attention." That's another way of trying to interrupt behaviors. It might be after the fact, but when we're all working, and we train on this, we're all working to kind of stop these behaviors and promote these behaviors. So, you want to be able to speak out at the time. And then,
can I interrupt? I want to interrupt.
Yeah.
I actually got this from a client that I was training. Someone in the audience said this, and then it really stuck with me. And I talk about it all the time now. Just walking by could be intervention. And I hadn't thought about that before until she said it. So we had this scenario in the training, and it was taking place in the kitchen, so we're doing what could we do? And she goes, "I might just walk in and like open the refrigerator and start rummaging around, pretending I'm looking for my lunch." And I'm like, that is so brilliant. Totally. So yeah, you don't have to be confrontational. Just making your presence known could be intervention for sure.
Right. Yeah. But when you also then train on civility, you're giving people tools on how, if they feel like they do want to directly confront someone, how do you do that? How do you protect yourself? How do you prepare yourself to go into a direct confrontation that might be really scary and that can stress us all out? Nobody's loving. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who are loving confrontation on a daily basis, but for the most part,
yes, there are those people
trying to avoid this, right? And so when you bring this level of civility and you explain that civility is just not these, kind of mere niceties, but it really is a value that we have, and you implement that in your policies and procedures, and it's one of your top goals. It's very hard to say that any kind of unwanted behavior in your workplace is going to be appropriate when you've got this floor of civility. I mean, it really, really sets the tone. And I think that a lot of managers and a lot of our clients, the feedback is this is a great tool, because we had all these different issues that relate to many different aspects in our workplace. Maybe it's employee, maybe it's managers, employees, maybe it's some project we're specifically working on. But when you kind of interject that expectation of civility, it just really helps affect change very fast. But I'm as a lawyer and looking at risk management, I think it's really important to be able to encourage these kinds of behaviors, but making sure you're explaining and giving tools to your folks on how does this actually work? What are some of the language that you can use? What is your style for doing this? And we work with folks to be able to, role play all different ways. And that is one of the most rewarding aspects of what we do is working with people on getting their own personal style on how to be a better ally in the workplace. And it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no hard and fast rule. You got to do it in the way that works for you so you can be comfortable. But yeah, the people you're asking to intervene, your workforce, they have to feel comfortable to do it. And that starts with civility. So, well, thank you so much, Gina. I really appreciate your time today. It was great to chat with you, and love that we're kind of on the same path, but a little bit different. So I look forward to continuing to watch Respect Outside grow and to be friends with you. So
great. Thank you, Catherine. My pleasure to be here. I look forward to that.